Hi, everybody. Welcome. Today we're going to be looking at data-driven instruction and, more importantly, some of the resources we have available to us here with our CMS platform. Now, I know with formative and summative assessments, you have a lot of different options when it comes to Socrative, to quizzes, to Schoology assessment materials, and things of those natures. But one in particular that I find really good because it is such a powerful data tool is going to be our actual CMS system that we can access from our portal. So I'm going to take you in on a dive into CMS because I think oftentimes people think that it's really clunky, it's confusing, it's really big, and it's really not. So in today's session, I'm going to be showing you just how easy CMS is to use. And on the flip side of that, what fantastic data that we can get because of it that is ultimately going to help make us instruct better and help increase student learning in a better way. So to get to CMS, we're going to click on our portal, our tile right there in our portal. And starting out, we're just going to talk about the CMS assessment itself. And so as I come in and begin to create my assessment, what you'll notice is that in CMS, you have two options. When I come over here to create, I can choose to create an express test, or I can choose to create a test manually. We're going to start off first with the express test. All right, so with our express test, we're going to put in our title and our subject area. Now, I was an 8th grade social studies teacher, so I'm going to use that as my example today, but it's going to be the same process regardless of your level and regardless of what subject that you teach. Now, our next part, our preferred standards, we're going to go down to our TEKS. I'm going to look for social studies content, and depending upon your department, as you can see, some of these TEKS have been updated to the most recent social studies. In fact, 2018, we actually will use the most updated of the standards here. So instruction source, north side, that's fine. Now test category. This is where we want to, generally speaking, if we're going to be creating this at our campuses, we can use either a school benchmark or shared assessment. Generally, I just say school benchmark. It helps define it a little bit easier there. Okay. Answer key only, no. Score type, total score. Now, a few things that I do want to point out to you here as we get into our test settings. I'm going to scroll down, and what I first want to highlight to you here is our accommodations right here. What's great about this, and one of the reasons why CMS is such a powerful assessment tool, is the fact that it has accommodations built directly into the test itself. So as the students are taking this online, they actually have this available to them. There's no need for you to record anything or add it. It's already there. So like right here, we have a line reader. So for your students that might have used overlays, you can choose to have a blue or pink overlay, magnifier, but also, and here's the big key thing, text to speech. Now, what's great about this is you can also do Spanish. So for my LOTI teachers and world languages, you do have that option to accommodate your students even in your Spanish classes. Now, enable printing, we can go ahead and leave these checked on. That's fine. In the past, we used to print out the test and the rubrics and the answer keys and all that. We don't need to do that, especially going into next year when we will be a one-to-one district with students to Chromebooks. This need for copying and printing isn't really going to be what it once was. But we can go ahead and leave that on just in case we do need that. Now, here's something I also want to point out, the test restrictions. Restrict access to item content and answer choices. What's great about this, and if you were unaware, the students can access and are going to access the test through CMS in their portal, just like they normally would. But what's great is after the test is over, they can actually see the item content and answer choices, so the questions and answers. So if you want them to do some sort of reassessment, they can actually go back and see what specific questions they missed. Now you can restrict that to always, so they never see it, and maybe you want them to come get a paper copy of from you to see what they miss, and that would be fine. Or we could turn it on before the end date. So if we have a window of, let's say, a week for this online test to be taken, they won't be able to see those until after that end date. But those are some of the basics right there. Or if we want to give a window of when the content and answers can be seen, we have that option as well. So this is a really cool, important setting that we can put in place if we choose to. Same thing with our the correct answers, or if we want to have no restrictions at all, then we can do that. But this is one to be aware of. And previously, it was on a different page of test creation. But right here at the very bottom, as we're putting our information in and our different settings, this is one area where we can always have this. And again, because we're using data-driven practices here, this would be a great way to have the students self-reflect on what they might have missed. All right, so once I have that in place, I'm now going to select my standards. And this is the great thing about the express test, is that I can choose the specific TEKs that I want to test, or I know that I've been covering in my class. So as we come in here, and let's just use this one right here, you'll notice that our ISTs have populated each of these different TEKs with a different number of questions. And generally, these are going to be your released STAR questions or EOC type questions. But let's say that we were testing over 8.5, like that was the content that we'd been covering in this lesson. So, and then I know 8.5C was going to be one that we covered, our early political parties. And then let's say we also talked about Andrew Jackson. I know that might be a little out of order, but what you'll notice is that there are 11 questions that are going to cover 8.5C. There are 10 that are going to cover 8.5F. So as I click Add to Test Map, what we're going to see there is it's going to take a second to populate, but it's going to pull up questions that are specifically tied to those standards. And then from here, it's going to allow me to select how many questions I want from each of those. So this is a random process. Now, if I do get questions that, maybe I don't think particularly go along with what I want, then it's possible that I can change them. But right now, it's going to randomly select questions that are from those specific standards. So I'm going to tell them how many I want, click Build the Express Test. And then from here, it's going to populate those. And if I'm happy with the questions that come up, I'm free to go and my test is ready. So here I'll go in and check this out. So again, 8.5C, which characteristics identified the boxes above. All right, so I'm just scanning through. Are these the type of questions I want to ask? Yes. All right, but let's say I wanted to maybe add one more. Notice over here, I can add an item. Now I can come in and put in my own, and we'll talk about manual creation here in just a little bit, but notice this option at the top as well, from item bank. So you'll notice it's populating all of my item bank selections. over here off to the left. So if I wanted to select specific standards, I can do so. So let's say we hit 8.3 as well, and 8.3b to be more specific. Now when I click that, I can come in and check the questions that are in the item bank for that specific standard. All right, so this is a good one. I want to pick this, and notice down here after I select it, I'm going to add to test, and it's going to throw it in with the questions that I already have. So right here down at the bottom. So with this, I have a wonderful test. This is one that I'm going to send to my students. Before I go in to make it public, you'll notice that I want to preview it as a student. And this is going to give you an idea of what the students will see as they're taking the test itself. All right, so notice as I highlight, now I can come in and put in my overlays if I need to do so. I have not activated the speech on it yet, but there will be a little option over here off to the right that will allow for the questions to be read to the students. So I can come in here and essentially view what it looks like. All right, when I'm done, I can click out of that. And then notice how I told you it hadn't generated the text to speech yet, and that's because I have not clicked this option. So before we want to make it public and ready to go, we need to click this option here. Now, depending upon how many questions you have and what sort of passages you might have within the question itself, it's going to take a little bit of time. But as you can see, the text-to-speech is going to generate. As it works through this process, you'll get a little notification up in the top right. There's going to be a little bell up here. And when it's ready, you'll be notified. A little 1 and a red dot will show up. And then from here, once this is generated, I am free to go ahead and publish the test. All right, so we did give it a little bit of time, and you notice up here that it turns red. You see a little 1, and over here off to the left says text-to-speech content is ready. So now I'm going to go and walk through my process of making this a published test. So I'm going to click on Make Public. Right now we're going to go into Ready to Schedule. The basic message that it's giving here is that content should be generated and previewed before scheduling the test. It's saying we're not going to be able to change the test after we schedule it. So are we wanting to proceed? Yes. So just kind of our little safety net there. Notice it brings us back to here. We're going to schedule. And this is when we're going to put our administration date. So if we're using, let's say, this next week as our beginning and end, score due date, generally I always make this just whatever the end date is. The score due date really doesn't matter on a campus level. This is going to be more for if you're actually manually scanning the Scantrons themselves. More again, more at a district type level with that. But notice our result in scoring prevents the students from launching the test before the start date or after the end date. This is crucial. Prevents students from accessing the test results until after the end date. Now you could choose to leave this on or off. What I like about CMS is the fact that the students walking out that day will know exactly what they made on that test. So if they need to be in tutorials the next day to try and do a makeup, then they have that ability. Prevent scanning of answer sheets after the score due date. Again, this is on more of a bigger scale, and that's why that score due date would be important. As we move on to the next part, assignment for the Northside Independent School District assigned to students. This is what I would encourage you to skip. especially if you're working in a PLC that's using this as a common assessment, that this is really not going to be necessary because you can only assign only the students that it's assigned to will be able to take it. So by not assigning it to students, it'll allow it to be open to the entire grade level, in this case, 8th grade social studies. So if me and my colleagues were wanting to use this as a common assessment, then all of our students would be eligible to do that. So it's okay to leave that unassigned. And now we get into our online testing. So you'll notice that CMS populates a passcode, online passcode. This is what you would give the students to get into the test automatically. But if you wanted to go in and change this into some other form, if you wanted to say child's class is awesome, whatever the passcode might be, I generally leave whatever CMS would put in here, just simply because it's harder for the students to remember to try and get into the test. So I would leave that just like it is. Now, this require the use of a secure tester application. This is really going to have to be something that you would talk with your group about on campus. And I know that will be in not complete hybrid like we are this year, but next year we will have some students that were online because they're at home, or we have some students that will be at school. Not everyone's going to have the secure tester application ready to go. And so this is something that generally I wouldn't worry too much about this in terms of locking them into the browser itself. There are other means of which you can kind of make sure that they're not getting into anything while taking an online test. All right, display take a test widget, review, allow only assigned students to take the test. Again, we're going to leave this off. Restrict access to specific days and times. Now, this would be another safety net for you if you're worried about giving online assessments, is that you could make this available only during your class periods. So if my first class starts at 9, my last class ends at 3, and I know I'm only testing on Tuesday, I can choose to do that. Or if I know my testing window is going to be just 3 days, that's when they're going to have to be on. That's the only time that they're going to be able to take it. All right, as we come into the item features itself, this is one that I really like and appreciate as a teacher, especially looking at data. Track and display student response times. So I can actually see, I will get a report of how long a student spent on each particular question. Also, scramble question and answer orders. So I could be on question 5, Johnny right next to me could be on question 7, and we still be on the same one, or vice versa. My 5 and his 5 would be completely different. Or if we were on let's say the same question, our answers may not be in the correct order. Now, the student-facing features, this is also kind of interesting as well, a timed test. So if you have your pre-AP students or AP students and you want them to start preparing for that element of the multiple choice where maybe they only get 45 minutes to take 45 questions, you could begin conditioning them for that. Or if you have a student, again, that's at home that you don't want them to take 4 hours to look up and take, we can turn this timed feature on and put it in what we want it to be. Allow students to resume a started test and pause it. Now, again, if we want them to sit down and take it all in 45 minutes, and it's kind of like STAR, you get up to take a bathroom break, that counts against your time, we can put that into our settings. Then lastly, show student scores upon test submission. Again, this is one that I always like and want the students to have. Save and publish. And from here, it's ready to go now. Here's my test ID. So if I wanted to copy it or send it to another teacher, I could just give them that ID to look up. Now for my students, here's my online passcode. So on the day of the test, I could either write this on the board or post it into Schoology. The students copy and paste that or type it in when they go into their CMS, and that gets them directly into the test. They take it like normal, they hit submit, they see their score, they know they're done. That's what I would tell my students. If you haven't seen your score, you haven't submitted, so make sure that you submit. And that's really basically all there is to the test creation, at least with the express test model that we have. Now, with the manual creation, you're going to see that it's very similar to what we just did with the express test. You're going to follow along the same procedures as we just previously did. The only difference now is instead of us selecting the standards and pulling random questions out of it, we get to put how many questions we want. Are they all going to be multiple choice, or some of them going to be short answer? In our case, we're going to make it all multiple choice. Again, I'm going to come back to my standards, my test settings. Again, I'm following the exact same process I already did. Restrict access. Okay, now I'm going to come generate test. And now you see here, it gives me, I can use items from the item bank, or I can author new items. In this case, I'm going to author new items. And so now here's the question I always get. Is there any way to easily upload questions from a previous exam? And the answer is, well, sort of. And what I mean by that, let's pretend that I'm using this test right here that I've had over Adams and Jefferson. Now, I can't just simply upload and have all of these questions go into the test itself. But a couple of ways that I can get around that, though, is I can come in and old school, copy and paste. Here's my question. And notice, even though I'm copying it with my mouse, unfortunately, CMS does make us use the keystrokes. So instead of right-clicking, I'm just going to Control V. And the same thing for my answer choices. All right, so I went ahead and added all of these in. Again, just copying and pasting. So now from here, once I have my question, I have my answers. I'm going to select which one is correct. And then I'm going to go in and select my standards. Now with this, we have a couple of options here. And what you notice is that I could come in and just select 8.1 and say this is a history question. But from a data perspective, that's really not going to be very beneficial to me as a teacher. So it is important for us to go in here and put in which specific this question is going to pertain to. And let's see, I said it was 8.10C. So I'm going to click 10, then I'm going to come here to C. And so now I'm tying this question to that standard. I don't need to worry about the points over here because CMS is going to do all the calculations. So whether I have 10 questions or 23 questions, it's going to properly give me my points. So I would just always leave that as a 1 point answer. We see our standard here. I'm going to click Save. Now I'm ready to move on. So that was the copy and paste method. One other way that you can input different questions and content, you'll notice that we do have a bunch of options here for our content and even our answer boxes. So if I needed to put in an image, or I wanted to record and insert some sort of audio or media into that, I can. But if I'm using, let's say, a test I've used in the past that I have good that I know is a good high quality question, what I'm actually going to come in and use is my snipping tool. So what you'll notice is that I'm going to snip a picture of that. I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to paste it. So now the picture is my question. Now the thing is, I might have to take out this number 9 right here. That wouldn't be too hard to do, just delete it out of my original document. But this is going to be question 2. And so now all I'm doing is putting A, B, C, E, since it's forcing me to have an answer in that blank right there. So as I do that, again, I'm going to come back and I'm going to look at, make sure I have the right answer. Okay, feature was the line between the United States and Louisiana. The answer should be C. And again, I'm going to come select my standard. On this one, what did I say it was? 10A. So now I've assigned that standard to it. I'm going to click Save, and now I'm done. So let's say I wanted to preview this as to what it would look like. So there was the one that I typed in, copy and pasted. And then as we go to the next one, notice how, again, all I did was just snip the actual question itself. And then A, B, C, or D, they select, and then they would turn that in. So there's my test preview. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to then return to test details. And so now I know that this is good. I'm done with this. Again, we're going to generate text to speech. Now, the one downside to this is when I'm using the snipping tool, it's not going to generate text to speech on something that I have snipped. So like we had the text here, which geographic feature is the boundary line. Unfortunately, it's not going to read that because it registers as a picture itself. But these that I copy and pasted in, it will read questions 1 just like they're typed in. So again, we're coming here, select text to speech, it's ready, make public. And again, we go through the same process we just did previously with our first example. Again, our start date. Turn those on. Save and publish. And it is ready to go. Here is our passcode that we would give the students. Here's our ID if we need to share it with any colleagues. And I can always access it through my assessments window over here on my left-hand side panel. You see that it's in progress here. They're both ready to go because we made them go live today. And we're ready to allow the students to take that test. All right, so with that, now that let's say our testing window is closed, all of our students have taken what they need to. Now let's look at the real kind of the meat and potatoes of what makes CMS a wonderful resource for us, and that's going to be the data. So as we come in here, we're going to look at our data reporting. Now there are 2 things I'm going to show you specifically on here. One, looking at what our data specifically as the individual teacher, and then secondly, from a PLC standpoint. So starting off, we're going to look at what it looks like from an individual teacher's perspective. Okay, so on your end, you're probably going to have your school already selected, but if I wasn't, I would select my specific school. Again, it's going to have the teacher, since it's your teacher account, it should already pull up your own information. But if it wasn't, I would select a specific teacher. Scroll down of which one I want to look at. And so in this case, we're going to look at CDB results. Notice I'm looking at all my sections. I can either select specific periods, or if I want to look at it holistically across the board, I can do so. So I'm going to select the CDB. And then from here, I'm going to look at item analysis. Me individually as a teacher, this is what I want to see, the item analysis. So I'm going to click on that tab. And then as it's populating the results, I'm going to change. Notice this little option here where it says order by. I'm going to take this and look by primary standards performance. So as it populates, what you're going to notice is on CDB2, if I'm the teacher of record, it's going to show me what is my lowest performing standards first. And then it progressively goes up from there. Now, this is going to be very beneficial in a lot of different ways. A, it shows you the areas that your students are the lowest in, but also what we'll see here is the questions that are asked. Maybe it's just a way that the question itself was presented to the students. So in other words, if 8.17b was question 5 and 6, but you notice I have a 20% difference in the number of students that got that question correct or incorrect from one question to the other, that might tell me that question 5, the way that it's asked, it's more of a test taking issue than a content issue. But that's something that you can look at. And what's really great about the breakdowns that we see when we look at primary standards performance. Same thing for here, questions 9 and 10. It's the exact same standard, but you'll notice over 81% got question 9 correct, whereas only half got question 10 correct. So this gives us a lot of really great data that we can go back and look at if we're looking at not only did they get it, but what are some interventions that we can put in place afterwards if they didn't get it, right? That maybe it's not necessarily the content we need to cover, but how are we looking at that content? Okay, and then so now I have that data that I specifically as a teacher can go back and look at. But what you'll also notice down here at the bottom is I can look at my individual students. Now, previously I had mentioned about track student response times. So what you'll notice here is on question 5 and question 6, question 9, question 10, how long that student took. And what's kind of interesting to see is how some of these students, and you'll notice this one took 15 minutes on question 24. They probably had walked away from the test at that point. But you can show you that if you have a lot of students that are maybe missing a question and the time is really long on it, maybe they're taking more time to think through it. Or it could be if they missed it, maybe they didn't take long enough. So that gives us some great data individually that you as a teacher can then specifically look at to try and target those individual students and your individual classes. All right, so with the item analysis, we see that there's going to be a lot of great data that I can take from that to help influence my instruction and really cater to some of the low areas the students are looking at. But now let's talk about from a PLC standpoint. So over here in our reporting dropdown, what we're going to do is we're going to use the reports feature here. So as I click on the reports feature, the good thing is we already have a pre-formatted report. So there's not a whole bunch of extra things that we need to do. But as I click on that pre-formatted report, my options that I want to look at next for a PLC, if we're looking at that same benchmark, is I'm going to be looking at the standards analysis by section enrollment. And so what this does is it shows you results based off of teacher specifically and based off of period specifically. So everybody in the PLC can see how the other teachers overall, you can't see specific students of the other teachers, but you can see how you compared on those specific standards. So I'm going to click on that. And what you'll see here is that I'll go in and I'll put in my information. Now, as I do that, I'm also going to click over here where it says do not group. This is an important step right here because we don't want to group our standards based on that. So I'm going to click right there with standards grouping. It's going to ask me for a little bit of information here. Which benchmark test do you want to use? Again, we're using our 8th grade social studies. So this just helps clear out some of the benchmark administrations that are here. Once that populates, I only want to focus on the district benchmark. But if I just want to look at school or collaborative assessments, I could just check on that. And what you'll notice is that this helps with filtering out some of the extra tests that would show up if I didn't do this step. All right, so here's CDB2, which we were just looking at. Again, I'm not worried about enrollment right now. Run report, and as the report generates, what we're going to see that it's going to pop up down below. So now I'm going to have my school and how the school compared to the district. You see the overall average, and then you can see how that school compared on each individual standard. So what we can see is that on this benchmark in 8th grade, this school did a very good job because we see that they're 6 points above the overall average, and they're also above each individual standard as well. So now what you'll see is that I can expand each individual teacher's little box, and that will further break down the different students in each individual class. So what we'll see is that this teacher did a pretty good job overall. We see that the overall average with their general ed students was 77, and then again we see how they did compared to the entire campus. There's our campus results for the general ed students. So just about ahead of all of them with these students. But again, if I want to open it up and look more specifically at the periods themselves, I can look specifically and see, is there any sort of trend? Where was my lower of the classes? And we can kind of see that here down at the bottom. This is probably the lowest, but a pretty consistent looking group here, to be perfectly honest. So not too bad. And then if I'm looking at some of my other colleagues and looking at how they compared, so if I know that I did so well here, maybe this teacher did really well looking at one specific standard. That was one. So if we notice previously on 10B, we were at roughly a 70%, but this teacher was at 86. This is what would really drive our PLC discussions, looking at this data to make those decisions on what are we doing to help the students. So, I mean, if we think about our 4 main PLC questions, what this section enrollment pre-formatted report is going to do for us, it's really going to allow us to hit the first 3 of those PLC questions. What do we want the students to learn? Well, we already have that because we have our standards and our questions tied to those standards. So that's what we want them to learn. How will we know that they learned it? Well, it's pretty obvious because we have their results right here. And then how will we respond if they don't know it? So again, using this 8.10b standard as my example, my students didn't learn it quite as well as what we see here. And so as a result of that, that's what's going to help drive me in our PLC meetings. Hey, teacher A, I see that you had these results. What did you do differently from what I did that I can implement when I'm reteaching or going back over with these questions and answers with the students in tutorials or what have you? Not to mention the fact that if we continue to go down, what we'll also see is that if I forgot what questions were associated with that standard, it tells me. And I can even click into the test question itself. So again, this is a very, very, very powerful tool that can and should be used by not only the individual teachers themselves, but also the PLCs, because you have a lot of tremendous data that's going to help you um, really curb what you're doing in your class and show you the weak areas that you need to shore up, as opposed to the areas where, well, maybe they got it, but we don't really know. So I highly encourage this to be used, and I'm also going to show you one other way that we can really use this data, especially on the student end, to allow them an opportunity to help bring some of those low areas up as well. All right, so as we wrap up and begin looking at our results with this, one important idea that I would really like to throw out to you is the idea of a reassessment contract, and something that you might think of introducing into your class next year as well. I've already mentioned the fact that the students will be able to see their own results within CMS. Now their dashboard looks a little bit different than ours, but it's somewhat similar here in the fact that they will be able to pull up their individual assessments. If you have the setting turned on to where that they can see the questions and answers that they missed, the specific ones, or if you just want to hand them a paper copy so that they can go back and compare it to what they missed or didn't, one idea to throw out to you is going to be the idea of a reassessment contract. Now, this reassessment contract is going to put a little bit more of the ownership back onto the students themselves. Now, I came up with this idea and adapted this back one time when I had a student who handed me his test and asked when he could take a retest. And so that just bothered me quite a bit. So I had to come up with a way of how can I put some of the ownership back on this student if they're not going to study in the first place and just wait for the retest, hoping that the retest is going to be easier than the original test. How can I put some of that ownership back on them? And so originally, this was something that was implemented to try and get the students to do some self-evaluation. What was their original assessment grade? What were the areas that they had trouble with? Why did they not do well? Surprisingly, a lot of students were actually very honest on this and just said did not study. So that was kind of interesting to me. But in addition to that, what are you going to do to prepare for a retest? And this is really where a lot of the students, I think, finally got it when it came to studying for the test. So they came up with, 3 or 4 things or activities they were going to do to show me that they were prepared this time. And then they had to provide evidence of completion. They couldn't just say study for 30 minutes. Well, how do I, as the teacher, know you studied for 30 minutes? And so this could be something like have a study log that my parents signed, something along those lines. And then I also had the parents sign it. Once that was done, then they brought it to me and I checked off what we were going to do in terms of a reassessment. It was going to be on this date, this time, this location. And then on the back side, these were some suggestions. Now, I never forced them to do any of these, but these were just possible suggestions if they ever needed help coming up with an activity or evidence of completion. So this was the old school way that I would do pencil and paper, but since then have adapted into a Google form. And this is a lot easier to fill out, and I'm not having to worry about copies and so forth. So if we go in and just have the student put in their name, period, what was my original grade, let's say, and of course there might be more that they would need to cover. This is just one example. But if they needed to Jefferson, Louisiana Purchase, let's say the Monroe Doctrine, um, amendment. And again, the idea behind this is they're looking at what is the content of the questions that I missed, what was the content that those questions covered, and this is what they would be typing in here. But let's pretend that those were what they needed to focus on. Then they click next. Here you'll see some of our same questions. Why did you not do well from the start? I had difficulty because I didn't study. Give me an explanation. And do the review. It goes on to next. And again, this is where that preparation part comes into play. Before my next test, I will complete the following activities by. So let's say that they want to retest on the 13th. So if they come and schedule, Ms. Childs, can we take a retest on the 13th? Sure, by this date, I'm going to complete the following activities. What is the evidence that I'm going to bring to my teacher, showing them that I did my example activity? Then I submit it. Now, the only downside to the Google form here is, unfortunately, I don't get a parent signature on this, and having the parent acknowledge that their student is reassessing. But to that end, once the student submits it, then now I, as the teacher, have record that I can always bring back up to a parent. Hey, this is what they said that they were going to do. This is what they had said that they were going to do. And I could always just copy and paste that over to a parent in an email if I ever need to inform them of that as well. And then so now on the back end of it, when I come into my responses, you'll notice I have everything documented here. Or if I want to make it easy and pull it up in a spreadsheet, I can do so as well. And so what you notice is that it is time-stamped when they submitted the form for reassessment. I now have what they said they need to focus on. Look, Mom and Dad, this is why they said they didn't do very well on it, and their explanation for not doing well. So again, these are things that I can just simply copy and paste and email over to the parents. This is the day they said they wanted to retest. This is what they were going to do. They should have brought you their paper showing that they got that done. And so now I have this at my disposal. Again, you notice that I had the submit another response. So this could be something I posted directly into Schoology itself and just had as in a reassessment folder. So anytime they want to reassess, they're going to they're going to come fill that out. And then we can look at our settings. Can they edit after they submit it? Generally, we want to take these off. The presentation themselves, progress bar, show link to submit another response. We want to make sure this is on so that if they are needing to reassess over multiple items, they can do that. It's not a quiz, so we're not going to worry about that. But what we can also do is go in and look at get email notifications for new responses as well. So again, with this reassessment contract, it's not something that's going to be submitted every single day by every single student. So we want to make sure that this is on so that I know to go and check when I do have a student that submits a response, that I get notified of that. So this would be something that I would have checked on in the settings as well. Now, with all that, this is just one way of making yourself really more efficient when it comes to assessing your students in class, working as a group in your PLC to make sure that your students are understanding the materials, and really a way to kind of keep and hold the students responsible for their learning. And so not all the emphasis is on you as the teacher. Again, we really want to work smarter, not harder, and find more efficient ways that we can get these results and this information back to the students themselves to help them be master of their own learning. So hopefully you found this video and these tips helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is terry.childs@nist.net. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to help you out. Let me know, and have a great summer and a great 21-22 school year.